Okay, for this video, I'm delving into some serious sort of subject matter, not comedic in nature. I am in the mood for some comedy, but I'm feeling more drawn to this particular video right now. And the reason is because it involves two of the most interesting people, not two of some of the most interesting people that I know of and appreciate, and am very glad that we have them in our midst. I really do wish that there were more people like them that were, in the public space, the public forum, that there are more people like them instead of a lot of the people that currently take up space in the public forum. And you know the type of people I'm talking about. The type of people that, in my opinion, don't really offer solutions. They just generate problems and continue to generate problems. And that's largely because their very existence depends on these problems continuing to exist. So the more they stir things up, the more problems can continue to exist. So I have little to no use for people like that. I like people like these gentlemen because, to me, they make the most sense, and they seem very logical, and their viewpoints are, well, I said they make the most sense. I was going to say their viewpoints are very commonsensical, which kind of means they make the most sense. Whatever. I like them. So I saw this video floating around on YouTube, and it's from Thomas Sowell's channel, and it says Jordan Peterson on Thomas Sowell. I don't think I've ever seen a video. I don't think they've ever been together, but I think this is just going to be a video of Jordan Peterson talking about Thomas Sowell. So it's about 11 and a half minutes long. So not super long, but, for me, I may turn this thing into like 20 or 30 minutes. I'll try not to. I can't help it. Sometimes I just say whatever's on my mind. Let's just go ahead and jump into it now and see what Mr. Peterson says, or Dr. Peterson, whatever. See what Jordan says.
Much Thomas Sowell. In many ways, he filled your...
Hold on, let me go back.
Have you read much Thomas Sowell? In many ways, he filled your societal role for the last generation from a different academic perspective. I'm just reading his book right now.
Okay. Is
gender equality desirable?
If it means equality of outcome, then almost certainly it's undesirable. That's already been demonstrated in Scandinavia. Because in Scandinavia...
What do you mean by that? Equality of outcome is undesirable?
Well, men and women won't sort themselves into the same categories if you leave them alone to do it of their own accord.
Right.
We've already seen that in Scandinavia. It's 20 to 1 female nurses to male, something like that. It might not be quite that extreme. And approximately the same male engineers to female engineers. And that's a consequence of the free choice of men and women in the societies that have gone farther than any other societies to make gender equality the purpose of the law. Those are ineradicable differences. You can eradicate them with tremendous social pressure and tyranny. But if you leave men and women to make their own choices, you will not get equal outcomes.
Right, so you're saying that anyone who believes in equality, whether you call them feminists, call them whatever you want to call them, should basically give up because it ain't going to happen.
Only if they're aiming at equality of outcome.
Oh, what would be the legitimate and what would be...
And that... This ties into stuff I've mentioned before about this concerted effort to try to just completely erase the differences between men and women and act like we're entirely identical when we're not. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's true. If left to their own devices, making decisions with their own free will, which we all have the right to do, men and women are going to naturally segregate themselves into different fields of whatever, employment, whatever. That's just part of who we are. And let us continue to be that way, because it's not natural to try to force us to behave unnaturally. It's just not. Okay, let's jump into this one. Some of these clips, I have a feeling I've done a Thomas Sowell thing before, one where Dave Rubin was talking with him. I don't know if they're going to show some stuff of him that I've already seen.
Because it ain't going to happen.
Only if they're aiming at equality of outcome.
Oh,
Yeah, and a quality of outcome, trying to have a quality of outcome is one of the most ludicrous things ever, because that's not possible either. And if you try to force it, then you're going to end up in things completely out of whack and unbalanced, and will lead to more problems than you think you're fixing. You're creating problems by trying to do stuff like that. There's a difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, and so many people don't seem to understand that difference. Okay, back to it.
what would be the legitimate and what would be the illegitimate deductions that an observer might make from the fact that America is, roughly speaking, 50% women, feminine, and yet there's only a single woman senator in Congress? What would be a legitimate, what would be an illegitimate deduction to make from that?
Well, as I look at numbers
Paradox.
from various places around the world, I don't find anything faintly resembling an even representation of people in any institution anywhere in the world, broken down by any way. There's been a recent study of military forces around the world in which they can find no country in which the military force represents even approximately the ethnic composition of the society. Sometimes the poorer groups are overrepresented, sometimes underrepresented. There are all kinds of factors there. Well, what's amazing to me is that this notion that people would be evenly represented except for these institutional policies, that notion has had such momentum behind it without a speck of evidence being asked or presented.
See, I'm leading back now to the question of why is there a single woman in the Senate, although half of Americans are women, and I guess I'm asking you whether this is a transcription of implicit anti-feminine values in this society.
Well, in a country where I think just over half the people are women, that if they wanted to fill the Senate with women, they could very well do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it may very well be that they take on the prejudices of men.
All sorts of things are possible. It's also possible that there are other reasons why women don't choose to get into positions like politics, because they have a set of demands which are very tough for most women to meet, and at the same time do the other things that most women do, such as raise children and so on.
That's what I was inviting you to speculate on.
Yes, I know that from my own case, I've been invited to be involved in politics and electorally and otherwise. And given the values that I have, there's just simply no way that those two things can go together.
Also, I think Thomas Sowell I think he's too pure for politics. I think politics so often corrupts people. There are a few politicians, yes, obviously, that are decent and try to do what's right, but almost without fail, they just go off course and they get hungry with this power that they have. And I just don't feel like he'd be a good fit. He's too logical. And I just don't think he'd have the patience for the nonsense that goes on in politics.
There's just simply no way that those two things can go together. That what I would have to give up in terms of my personal life would just not be worth it to me. I suspect that that's probably true for a lot of women. When I did a study of academic women, I found that women who do follow academic careers, get their PhDs and so on, have much lower rates of marriage than either non-academic women or academic men, and much higher rates of divorce among the few who do get married. Apparently there must be a great deal of stress in that. And just from people that I know, I can see where there is a great deal of stress in trying to have two people following their career when one is expected around the home to provide all the housewifely services in addition to writing those articles and books. It gets to be a little much.
So you would dismiss as thoughtless any complaint against a society that had only...
And the thing is that I had this little thread of thought in my brain, but so the reason why women often choose certain fields is it's because of what internally motivates them. Like a lot of women are drawn to fields that have to do with caretaking and education and things like that. But at the same time, they also feel this sense of obligation. And I don't mean obligation in a negative sense. I mean this commitment to the personal side of their life, their marriage, their kids. And in many ways, that ends up outweighing the career aspirations that they have. And so they willfully choose not to pursue certain things because of these commitments that they feel more tightly drawn to than the other stuff, the career stuff, the outside stuff. That's just the way it is with a lot of women. And there's nothing you can really do to diminish that or to try to take that to, I mean, you can try to act like it doesn't exist, or you can try to act like it's a shame and women shouldn't have to feel that way. But the fact of the matter is that women, biologically, we are the ones that carry the babies, give birth to the babies, nurture the babies, and they're very, very early, months or weeks or whatever. A lot of times women will go back to work afterwards. And then sometimes they choose not to go back to work, or they decide later that they want to stay home and raise their children. And it seems to me like there's this almost vicious anger about the choice that a woman will make to do that from other women. As if, how dare you choose to do this thing that you are biologically drawn to do? We need to take this motivation away from you. I see that going on a lot. Like it's something that the poor woman has to sacrifice. It's such a terrible sacrifice and a terrible burden that she has to do this. And this is, this explains the difference in like the wage gap myth that's going on, that continues to persist despite the evidence to the contrary, that when you factor in all these things that's going on in a woman's life, and, she's not working as much because she has family and she has kids and she has to take time off to have a baby or whatever, you factor all of these things in that come into play with why a woman does certain things in her career. When you do that, there's the wage gap just completely disappears. For the most part, from what I understand, everything I've listened to with Sowell, because of the way he explains it, which makes sense. Again, this is why I'm drawn to someone like Sowell and Peterson. So that's a little bit of a tangent from what they were talking about here, but not really. It's connected to the same sort of thing.
As thoughtless, any complaint against a society that had only one woman in the Senate, or only 11% blacks in Congress, or only 6% Jews, or whatever.
I wouldn't dismiss it. I would simply say, if there is evidence that you have, let us see that evidence. What I think is really tragic is that assertions have been made, not only without evidence being offered, but without anyone even asking for evidence.
That's still happening. That is still going on in so many different ways. It's really frustrating. I think that's just the nature of people, but it's still frustrating to witness. I'm not a fan.
Been made, not only without evidence being offered, but without anyone even asking for evidence. It's as if these are self-evident truths that have been brought down from the mountainside.
What is one thing you hope people will leave this debate with, and why? Jordan.
Well, he's not really talking a whole lot about Sowell.
I hope they leave this debate with a belief in the power of communication between people with different views. There is a growing idea on college campuses, tell me if I go over my minute, that there really is no such thing as free speech, because people are only the avatars of their group identity and they have nothing unique to say. And besides that, there's no communication across boundaries of identity or belief. And I think that that's an unbelievably dangerous and pernicious doctrine. And I think that people of goodwill, despite their differences, can communicate, and they can both come out of that communication improved, even though there might be some dissent and some dissent and some dissent on the way. And so that's what I would hope people would come out of this.
Were you ever a Marxist?
Okay. I agree with everything he says there. There definitely is a very disturbing trend of tribalistic, antagonistic groups wanting to shut down all communication. Things like well, if you believe a certain way or if you vote a certain way, you are scum of the earth and you're not even worth talking to. We need to just pretend you don't exist, and we need to try to erase you from society, or, and this sort of thing exists, and it's not just like politics or whatever. It's in a lot of different things throughout society, and it feels like it's becoming worse. I think social media, I've mentioned before, social media I think has a large it's a large factor. But something I'm noticing is he's not talking much about Thomas Sowell here. I'm a little frustrated by the title of this video. I thought he was going to actually go into detail about Thomas Sowell, different things about him, but he hasn't done that yet. Right now it's just showing different clips of both of these men.
And so
the different things they say.
That's what I would hope people would come out of this.
Were you ever a Marxist?
Oh, yes, during my 20s. Fortunately, unlike today's left, I never felt that I had to avoid seeing what people with different views thought. And so during all my years as a Marxist, I read everything across the political spectrum. I have to this day a book on Burke that I first read back when I was an undergraduate at Harvard. And I treasured that book. I could tell even then. And so I understood that there were reasons why people have different views, as I see even today. That it's not just that it's not just a question of being on the side of the angels against the forces of evil. It's pathetic that people nowadays think that the fact that they disagree with somebody is a reason to go creating a riot and destroying property, as at Berkeley just recently.
Preach.
The latest among any number of similar incidents across the country.
You may not realize it, but you are currently funding some dangerous people. They are indoctrinating young minds throughout the West with their resentment-ridden ideology.
Yes, this is happening. It's been happening for decades. It's happening even worse now. It's like universities, colleges are indoctrination centers 101. Like, that doesn't even make sense what I said, but they're like the #1 indoctrination center, our education places. It's almost tomorrow, so I'm not quite here, but places of education are and have been pretty much the #1 source of indoctrination. The media is also a source. It's very troubling. I am heartened to see that more people are gravitating towards more economical choices and more commonsensical choices like trade schools. As far as I'm concerned, in general, depending on your career choice, your path of study, a 4-year degree, and I'm someone who had a 4-year degree. I went into business, computers, and information systems, stuff like that. But for the most part, that route is increasingly demonstrating itself to be not a good financial choice, and probably as well not a good personal choice. So yeah, I think trade school is the way to go. For sure.
They have made it their life's mission to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal.
Which is crazy too, because they're doing and saying these things within the same system that gives them the freedom to do and say these things. I just can't. I mean, they have the right, but it's just like, do they not? I mean, if they would try to do something like that in a place like China, can you imagine? Can you imagine? Like, really?
Itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal. If you're a taxpayer or paying for your kid's liberal arts degree, you're underwriting this gang of nihilists. You're supporting ideologues who claim that all truth is subjective, that all sex differences are socially constructed, and that Western imperialism is the sole source of all third world problems. They are the postmodernists, pushing progressive activism at a college near you. They produce the
I don't even like to call it progressive because to me, it's the antithesis of progressive. To me, people that are this way are regressive in nature.
pushing progressive activism at a college near you. They produce the mobs that violently shut down campus speakers, the language police who enshrine into law use of fabricated gender pronouns, and the deans whose livelihoods depend on madly rooting out discrimination where little or none exists.
A recent YouGov poll found that 19% of millennials, 1 in 5 young Americans, holds a favorable view of communism. To the 1 in 5 young Americans who holds a favorable view of communism, how can this be? What's going on?
I think the education system has a lot to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Back when I was quite young, 20 years old, I read a book called China Shakes the World about how the communists took over in China. And in the last chapter, he tries to explain it. He says it's the education system had a lot to do with it. Now, at the time, it struck me as a very odd explanation. Now that I've had a half a century or so in the American education system, it doesn't strike me as odd at all.
The best thing you can do is teach people to write, because there's no difference between that and thinking. And one of the things that just blows me away about universities is that no one ever tells students why they should write something. It's like, well, you have to do this assignment. Well, why are you writing? Well, you need the grade. It's like, no, you need to learn to think. Because thinking makes you act effectively in the world. Thinking makes you win the battles you undertake. And those could be battles for good things. If you could...
I have to be honest, I hated all the writing, all the essays that I had to do in school. I mean, some of them I liked, but they got to be so tiresome. I'm so glad to be done with that part of my education experience. You have no idea. But looking back on some of the things I wrote, I agree with what he's saying. It does teach you how to think, how to organize your thoughts, how to construct your argument or whatever point you're trying to make. But I don't miss having to do that at all, not one bit. Especially because the things we had to write about was stuff I hated, like essays on things that we had to read in English class that bored the ever-loving hell out of me. I couldn't stand it. It was so boring. Just so, I don't know. If it was something that interested me, it wasn't a problem. But when it was something that was just, I could do without it, yeah, I hated every single moment of that.
You can think and speak and write, you are absolutely deadly. Nothing can get in your way. So that's why you learn to write. It's like, and I can't believe that people aren't just told that. It's like, it's the most powerful weapon you can possibly provide someone with.
So it's pretty clear from all the reading of yours that I've done, you put basic education basically is number one, right? I mean, is that the number one thing that you can do as a human being? Get educated?
I guess, although I wouldn't carry it too far, because some of the most disastrous notions in the world have come from highly educated people with, I'm sure, high IQs.
So,
yeah, which ties around to something that, not something, but what Peterson was just saying, that makes you very dangerous. So when you have people that have these really crazy sort of ideas about stuff, and yet they can articulate them very well, they have the power to have a destructive influence on a lot of people. So, I mean, we've seen this sort of thing happen before throughout history in different ways. Now, some people use the brute force to get what they wanted. Some people had what was the name of that character in Lord of the Rings? Wormtongue? They had that little thing going on, and then when people were kind of under their grasp, then they exerted their iron fist over them. By then it was too late to do much about it.
Perhaps critical thinking with a little education.
I will settle for almost any kind of thinking. It's so rare these days.
Oh, no.
We're raising whole generations who regard facts as more or less optional.
Oh, I know. And they are offended by facts. that's the most crazy thing to me too. So many people, when you're in a debate with them or discussion or whatever, and you got a disagreement going on and facts start coming out, you just general you, obviously, and you're laying facts on the table. And sometimes those facts they're not welcomed because they present an unfortunate or an inconvenient reality. The person who is in disagreement with that or would like to pretend that these facts don't exist, they then will start to, I've noticed, attack the person sharing the facts. Then make it like this person who's sharing the facts is whatever ist you want to, whatever ist or obe or whatever is very commonly attached to by certain people whenever an argument happens. And that's pretty troublesome. I like to see when people can have a calm, rational discussion about things that might ordinarily really be hot button and cause a lot of people to typically just snarl at each other and just descend into chaos. It's refreshing to see people be able to debate without it turning into personal sort of attacks on the person that they're disagreeing with, which is unfortunately something that happens a lot. It feels like it's happening so much more than it was, but maybe it's just, this is part of human nature. I guess that's just the way it is with us folks, us humans. It's one of our more negative it's one of our more negative traits, let's say.
They're being taught that it's important to have views, and they're not being taught that it's important to know what you're talking about.
Right.
It's important
like
to
facts don't care about your feelings. I hear
the
that.
opposite viewpoint, and more important, to learn how to distinguish why viewpoint A and viewpoint B are different and which one has the most evidence or logic behind it. They disregard that. They hear something and they hear some rhetoric and they run with it.
𝐂𝐸 says, have you read much Thomas Sowell? In many ways, he filled your societal role for the last generation from a different academic perspective. I'm just reading his book right now. It's, what is it? Black rednecks and white liberals.
Oh, yeah,
is that right?
That.
Black
I haven't read that one.
rednecks and white liberals. Yeah.
Excuse me.
And I'm still making my mind up about it. It's quite a radical idea. I mean, in that book, Sowell claims that Black urban culture is actually a derivative of Southern cracker culture, and that in turn is a derivative of rather dysfunctional dysfunctional British culture. What would you call British rural culture from a couple of 100 years ago? I'm still thinking it through. I find the book really interesting, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was true, but it's quite original. The thesis is quite original. So I'm working my way through that right now, and I don't have anything much more intelligent to say than that.
Okay, it's just about done. Okay, while I had quite a bit to say on the different things that these two gentlemen were talking about, I am a little disappointed that we were actually not treated to what the title of the video says. It wasn't until the last minute of this entire video that it specifically zeroes in on Jordan talking about Thomas Sowell. I would have liked to have seen, I don't know if he ever ended up doing this, but let's say after he finished reading the book, if he would do some sort of video commentary about it. I would have preferred to see something like that, because that would more accurately match up to the title, Jordan Peterson on Thomas Sowell. But, oh well. This felt a little clickbaity. And this came straight from Thomas Sowell's YouTube channel. I don't know if it's probably not run by him, I'm sure, but nevertheless, I appreciated hearing what both of these men had to say, and much, if not everything they say, resonates very strongly with me. And I've mentioned before why I'm drawn to people like this. Okay, I've talked myself out. I don't have anything else to add that I can think of right now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this, move on to something else. I actually do have energy in me to move on to at least one more video, I believe. All right, you guys. Later.